The dust of late summer settled on everything in the small town of Harmony Creek. A fine, golden powder that coated the windows of the Oak Grove Cafe and clung to the faded denim of Elias Thorne's work jeans. At 76, Elias moved with the deliberate, patient rhythm of a man who had learned long ago that rushing only tired you out faster. Every Tuesday and Friday he drove his old Ford pickup into town for supplies, and his first and only stop was always the cafe. Beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Buster, a German shepherd whose sable coat was threaded with gray, and whose eyes held the same quiet, watchful intelligence as the man who was his whole world. Buster wasn't just a dog. He was a prescription filled years ago, a living, breathing anchor against the tidal pull of memories that threatened to drag Elias under. The tag on his vest, worn and soft from 1,000 pats, read service animal. Most folks in town knew what it meant. They knew Elias had been a medic a long time ago in a place very far away. They didn't know the details, and Elias never offered them. His life was now about the predictable turn of seasons on his small farm, the ache in his bones that forecasted rain, and the warm, solid weight of Buster sleeping at the foot of his bed. The bell over the cafe door chimed a soft, tinny welcome. The air inside was thick with the comforting smells of coffee, frying bacon, and worn vinyl. Elias settled into his usual booth in the corner, the one with a clear view of the door. Buster lay down dutifully at his feet, his tail giving a single, soft thump against the linoleum before he rested his head on his paws. A young woman with tired, kind eyes and a warm smile approached. Her name was Maya. She was new, only a few months on the job, but she had the gentle efficiency of someone who knew what it was to be weary. "Morning, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice soft. "The usual?" Elias nodded, his own smile a small, infrequent thing that barely creased his weathered face. "Please, Maya. And a glass of water." She returned moments later with a steaming mug of black coffee and a glass of ice water. But she also carried a small, stainless steel bowl, which she placed carefully on the floor beside Buster. "He looks thirsty," she said, before Elias could even ask. She then disappeared behind the counter and returned with a single strip of crisp bacon, which she broke into pieces and dropped into Buster's dish. Buster looked up at Elias, a silent question in his amber eyes. Elias gave a slight nod, a private signal between them. The dog lapped at the water gratefully, then gently took the bacon. Elias felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was a small thing, a gesture that cost next to nothing, but it was offered with a grace that felt immense. Most people ignored Buster, or worse, looked at him with a flicker of fear or annoyance. Maya had seen him not as an accessory or a tool, but as a living creature deserving of a simple kindness. "Thank you," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. "That was good of you." "It's nothing," Maya replied, her smile genuine. "He works hard, I can tell." She didn't know the half of it. She didn't know that Buster's work was done in the dead of night, when he would nudge Elias awake from nightmares filled with the percussive thud of mortars and the scent of sand and iron. She didn't know that the dog's steady presence was the only thing that kept the four walls of Elias's farmhouse from closing in on him. Elias left a $10 bill for his $2 coffee, a silent thank you that he was too reserved to speak aloud. As he left, he saw the cafe's owner, Mr. Henderson, watching Maya from behind the counter, his face a mask of pinched disapproval. A knot of unease tightened in Elias's stomach, but he dismissed it. It was just a bowl of water and a piece of bacon. It was nothing. The following Friday, Elias returned. The familiar comfort he usually felt upon entering the cafe was absent. The air was different, still, and without warmth. Maya was nowhere to be seen. A different waitress, a teenager with nervous hands and eyes that wouldn't meet his, took his order. She brought his coffee but no water for Buster. The silence from the floor at his feet was a palpable absence. Elias nursed his coffee, the bitter taste mirroring the feeling growing inside him. He watched Mr. Henderson oversee the lunch rush, a man who moved as if every interaction was a transaction to be optimized. After paying, Elias paused at the counter. "Is Maya working today?" he asked, his tone even. Mr. Henderson turned, his expression flat and impatient. She is no longer employed here. The knot in Elias's stomach tightened into a cold stone. Why is that? That is an internal business matter, Henderson said, his voice clipped. He began wiping down the counter with furious, precise strokes. Elias didn't move. His stillness had a weight to it, a gravity that made the owner finally look up, irritated. Look, Henderson sighed. She violated health code policy and company rules. We don't allow employees to feed animals off the premises, especially not from our kitchen supplies. It's a liability. The words hung in the air, sterile and cold. Liability, company rules, health code. They were the language of a world that had no room for the small, unwritten laws of human decency. She gave my dog a bowl of water and a piece of bacon, Elias stated, the facts laid bare and simple. He's a service animal. It doesn't matter, Henderson said, his voice rising with defensive righteousness. Rules are rules for a reason. We can't have every stray getting a handout. If I make an exception for one, where does it end? This is a business, not a charity. The casual dismissal, the lumping of Buster in with every stray, struck a deeper chord in Elias than any personal insult could have. He saw in Henderson's eyes a familiar emptiness, the cold logic of the bureaucrat, the detached rationale of the man who signs the order but never has to see the consequences. He had seen that look in the eyes of officers who spoke of acceptable losses and operational necessities. She's a good worker, Elias said quietly. A kind person. Kindness doesn't pay the bills, Henderson retorted, turning his back to signify the end of the conversation. Elias stood there for a long moment, the quiet hum of the cafe fading into a dull roar in his ears. He felt a profound sense of responsibility. His dog, his routine, his presence had, through a simple act of kindness, brought ruin to a young woman's life. He walked out of the Oak Grove Cafe, the bell over the door sounding like a final, mournful toll. He knew he would never be back. But the matter was not closed. For Elias Thorne, a debt had been incurred, and debts in his world were always paid. The guilt sat with him through the weekend, heavy as the humid summer air. On his farm, the familiar chores felt hollow. Mending a fence post, clearing brush from the creek bed. The physical work usually cleared his mind, but now it only gave him more time to think about Maya's tired eyes and the injustice of her dismissal. He knew, with the certainty of a farmer who knows his soil, that a job at the cafe was likely all that stood between her and genuine hardship. He found her address in the thin local phone book, listed under an M. Garcia on a street on the other side of town, the side where the houses were smaller and the lawns were a little less green. On Monday morning, he drove his truck to the address, a small, worn-out duplex with peeling paint and a sagging porch. He knocked, and after a moment, the door opened. Maya stood there, looking smaller and more fragile without her waitress apron. Her eyes widened in surprise, then clouded with a flicker of shame. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Elias," he corrected gently. "My name is Elias. May I have a word?" She led him into a living room that was sparse but immaculately clean. A child's worn teddy bear sat on a threadbare sofa. The air smelled of laundry soap and worry. "I came to apologize," Elias began, holding his old straw hat in his hands. "What happened at the cafe? It was because of me, because of Buster."
"I'm deeply sorry."
Tears welled in Maya's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "It wasn't your fault. I knew the rule. Mr. Henderson, he was just looking for a reason. I was 5 minutes late last week." She gestured vaguely around the room. "I'm a single mom. My son, Leo, is with my sister right now. This job, it was everything." Elias's heart, a muscle he had long thought hardened by time and tragedy, ached with a profound and terrible weight. He had seen this kind of quiet desperation before, in the faces of civilians caught in conflicts they didn't create. He saw the same resilience, the same unfair burden. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside, Tucked behind his driver's license was a worn and heavy coin. It wasn't currency. On one side was the insignia of the 1st Cavalry Division. On the other, an eagle clutching a medic's cross, with an inscription around the edge, FOB Kestrel, that others may live. He held it out for her to see. A long time ago, he said, his voice low and steady, I was a medic. We were stationed at a small, remote outpost. It wasn't a good place. One night we took heavy mortar fire. A lot of men were hurt. One of them was a kid, PFC Miller. He was 19. He was hit bad and he was scared. While I was working on him, he gave me this, a challenge coin. He said his platoon sergeant gave one to all his men, to remind them they were never alone. Elias paused, the memory as clear as the day it happened. I did what I could for him. We all did. He made it to the medevac chopper. I never knew what happened to him after that. But the men in my unit, they saw the coin. After that day, it became a kind of symbol for us. It meant you didn't leave your people behind. Ever. It meant you took care of the person next to you, no matter the cost. He looked from the coin to Maya's face. You showed my partner a kindness you didn't have to. You treated him like he was one of your own. In my book, that makes you one of ours. And we don't leave our people behind. He put the coin back in his wallet and took out a folded envelope. It contained $500, most of what he had until his pension check arrived. This is to help you until we find you something better, he said, placing it on the small table between them. Maya stared at the envelope, then at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. I can't take this. It's not a gift, Elias said firmly. It's an advance. We're going to find you a good job. A place that understands what kindness is worth. That evening, Elias sat at his simple wooden kitchen table. For the first time in years, he made a phone call that wasn't about farm supplies or a doctor's appointment. He dialed a number he knew by heart, one that connected him to a retired sergeant major named Cole, who lived 3 states away but was still the unofficial switchboard operator for the scattered remnants of their unit. He explained the situation, his voice calm and factual, without embellishment or emotion. He told Cole about Maya, about Henderson, about the simple injustice of it all. He didn't ask for a confrontation. He simply asked, "Do you know anyone near Harmony Creek? She's a good person. She needs a job." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Cole finally spoke, his voice was like gravel and iron. "Understood, document. We don't leave our people behind," he paused. "Consider it handled." The next morning, a Tuesday, the Oak Grove Cafe opened at 6 a.m. as usual. At 7, the first man walked in. He was in his late 60s, with a faded 1st Cav baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He sat at the counter, ordered a black coffee, and paid with exact change. He didn't say another word. 5 minutes later, 2 more men came in. They took a booth. Both wore jackets with subtle, embroidered unit patches that no one but another soldier would recognize. They ordered coffee and water. They paid in cash, leaving no tip. By 8 o'clock, every seat in the cafe was filled. The men came in 1s and 2s, a silent, orderly procession. They were old, mostly. Some walked with limps. Some had faces as weathered as Elias's. They came from the next town over, from the city an hour away, from farms tucked into the surrounding hills. They were mechanics, retired teachers, truck drivers, and widowers. They were the men of FOB Kestrel and the units that had served alongside them, a network connected by shared hardship and an unbreakable code. They didn't speak to each other. They just sat, nursing their coffees, creating a dense, impenetrable wall of silence. The regular customers came to the door, saw the packed cafe, and turned away, confused. Mr. Henderson rushed out from the back, his face a blotchy red. He saw a room full of old men, all staring into their cups, their presence a quiet, suffocating judgment. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice strained with false cheer. No one answered. The only sounds were the clink of a spoon against a mug and the hum of the refrigerator. The teenage waitress was hiding in the kitchen, terrified. Henderson's bluster began to crack. Look, if you're not going to order more, I need these tables. The man at the counter, the first one to arrive, finally looked up. His eyes were pale blue and as cold as a winter sky. We're fine, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable ring of command. The silent siege lasted for 4 hours. One by one, as they finished their single cups of coffee, the men would stand, leave their exact payment on the table and walk out.
No threats.
No raised voices.
No confrontation.
It was a protest conducted with the chilling discipline of a ghost platoon. It was a storm of quiet, unyielding presence. They dismantled his business not with anger, but with the sheer, heavy weight of their collective disapproval. By noon, the cafe was empty again, but the damage was done. The silence they left behind was louder than any shout. Henderson stood in the middle of his empty dining room, the scattered dollar bills on the tables like funeral lilies. He finally understood. He hadn't just fired a waitress. He had trespassed on sacred ground. News of the silent protest rippled through Harmony Creek with the speed of small-town gossip. It wasn't reported in any newspaper, but the story was told over fences, in the aisles of the grocery store, and at the post office. People who had known Elias for years as the quiet, solitary farmer began to look at him with a new kind of respect. He received no public glory. That was never the point. The recognition he received was quieter, more meaningful. An anonymous bag of his favorite apples was left on his porch. The owner of the hardware store refused payment for a new set of shovel handles, just nodding and saying, "This one's on the house." Elias, a woman he barely knew, stopped him in the street, touched his arm, and said, "Thank you." 2 days after the storm, a letter arrived for Maya from a large logistics company in the nearby city. It was a job offer for an administrative position, with full benefits and a starting salary nearly double what she had made at the cafe. At the bottom of the formal letter was a handwritten note. "Sergeant Major Cole sends his regards. Welcome to the team." That Saturday, as Elias was working in his barn, re-oiling a leather harness for a piece of equipment he rarely used, he heard the crunch of tires on his gravel driveway. Not one truck, but 3. He stepped out into the bright sunlight and saw them, a handful of the men from the cafe. Cole was among them. Elias stood his ground, a flicker of apprehension in his chest. He wasn't a man who liked to fuss. Cole walked toward him, his hand outstretched. He was a big man, but he moved with a quiet authority. "Doc," he said, his grip firm. "Figured your fence line looked like it could use some attention." Elias looked past him and saw the other men already unloading post-hole diggers and rolls of wire from their trucks. He was at a loss for words. "You didn't have to do any of that," Elias finally managed, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "The phone call was enough." Cole just looked at him, his gaze taking in the slightly sagging porch, the field that needed mowing, the quiet loneliness that clung to the place like ivy. "We don't leave our people behind, Elias," he said, his voice softer now. "That includes you, especially you." For the rest of the day they worked. They didn't talk much about the past. They spoke of their children, of aching backs, of the price of feed. But beneath the simple talk ran a deep, unspoken current of understanding. They mended his fences, secured a loose shutter on the barn, and reinforced the steps to his porch. They worked with the easy, synchronized rhythm of men who had once depended on each other for their very lives. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, they sat on his porch, sharing bottles of cold water. No one mentioned Henderson, who, they'd heard, had put the Oak Grove Cafe up for sale. No one mentioned Maya's new job. The victory was not in the punishment of one man, but in the restoration of another's dignity. A month later, Elias drove his truck back into town. The sign on the cafe had changed. It was now the Harmony Grill peeking inside. He saw it was run by a young couple he recognized from the local farmer's market. On impulse, he pulled over. Buster, sensing the change in routine, whined softly. "Just for a minute, boy," Elias murmured, patting his head. He walked in. The place was brighter, the air lighter. The young woman behind the counter smiled. "Can I get you something?" "Just a coffee to go, please," he said. As she prepared it, her husband came out from the kitchen. He saw Buster waiting patiently by the door. Without a word, he grabbed a clean bowl, filled it with fresh water, and carried it outside, placing it on the sidewalk for the dog. He gave Buster a gentle scratch behind the ears before coming back inside. Elias watched the exchange, a slow, deep sense of peace settling over him. He paid for his coffee and walked back to his truck. The circle was complete. An act of kindness, once punished, was now the new standard. That evening, Elias sat on his newly repaired porch, the air crisp with the first hint of autumn. Buster lay at his feet, his breathing slow and steady. Elias pulled the challenge coin from his pocket, its metal cool against his palm. The eagle, the cross, the words, "that others may live." He had spent a lifetime trying to live up to that promise, often in silence, often alone. He had believed it was about grand sacrifices on distant battlefields. But perhaps it was also about the small battles, the ones fought in quiet cafes and on lonely farms. It was about mending fences, both real and metaphorical. It was about refusing to let a single act of decency be erased by indifference. He watched the sun climb the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, felt the quiet promise of a new day breaking over the land he had sworn to protect, one small piece at a time.